everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet the puff ripple stitch. If you love all things crochet and are passionate about the craft, then you have come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss out on any of my future crochet videos. Now I couldn't find a nice puff ripple blanket pattern anywhere. So if you know of one that already exists, please don't tell me because I spent ages trying to work this out. Maths is not my strong point. There was a lot of scribbling on paper, trying to work out pattern multiple repeats and all that nonsense. So if this already exists, don't break my heart. Don't tell me I could have made my life easier. I've used Ice Yarn Magic Light for this and a 5mm crochet hook. I'm just going through the yarn I already have in my stash. Puff stitches can be a bit of a yarn eater, so just bear that in mind. You will need more yarn than you usually do for a decent size afghan. All right, without any further ado, let's leap into how you crochet this really pretty puff ripple blanket. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using a slightly different, darker colorway than the one I've used in my blanket, using ice yarns again and the 5mm crochet hook. I advise whatever yarn you use for puff stitch, go a hook size bigger than the yarn recommends, purely because that means your tension is a little bit looser and you get nice, fat, juicy puff stitches. Now, if you haven't done many puff stitches in the past, I thoroughly recommend that check out my normal puff stitch video. I have linked to it, a little eye will have popped up here. That will teach you how to do puffs just back and forth in a straight row and is great for practicing your puff stitches, but I will show you briefly how you do a puff stitch for this video too. Now the pattern multiple for this puff ripple is 19 plus 3. So what that means is you keep chaining 19, 19, 19, 19 for as wide as you want your project to be, then add 3 chains at the very end. Now I'm just going to make a tiny sample for you today. I'm going to pop a slip knot onto my hook. So I am going to chain 57, which is 3 times 19, then 3 more chains at the end for a total of 60 chains for this small sample. So that is my 3 times 19 plus 3 chains right at the very end. So the first row is the setup row, and to start we're going to work into the 5th chain from the hook. Now this loop on your hook does not count as anything, so you want to count back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and into this 5th chain here we're going to work a puff stitch. Now for my puff stitches, I like big, fat, generous puff stitches. So I do 4 yarn overs. If you want them even fatter, keep going. Or if you want them skinnier or you're using larger yarn, do less yarn overs for your puffs. But this is how I do my puff stitches. So yarn over, go into that chain, pull up a loop and pull it up nice and tall as it will go. And again, yarn over, go into the chain, pull it up. So that was twice. Do it again. That's 3 times. And 1 more, 4 times. So it stretches out that chain, but don't worry. Once you have, how many loops? I think it's 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Once you have 9 loops on your hook, yarn over and you're going to pull through all except that last loop. So you want to be left with 2 loops on your hook, then yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. That is your puff stitch. Chain 1, skip a chain, puff stitch into the next. So just like before, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, do that 4 times. That's once, try and keep everything as loose as possible. You don't want little angry type puff stitches. Then yarn over, angle your hook down so you don't catch on all those loops. Pull through all bar that last loop. So you've got 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, and pull through those 2 loops. Chain 1, skip a chain, puff into the next. Chain 1, skip a chain, puff into the next. So you should have 4 puff stitches. Now chain 1, skip a chain, and into the next chain we're going to do puff stitch, chain 2, puff stitch, all into that same chain. So we're forming a sort of peak. So that's my first puff stitch, chain 2, and pop another puff stitch into that same chain. Chain 1, skip 1, puff in the next. Repeat that 2 more times. Chain 1, skip 1, puff, chain 1, skip 1, puff. So you want to have 3 puff stitches with chain 1s in between after this sort of double puff up the top here. This first row is the trickiest because you're working into the chains. From row 2, it gets an awful lot easier. So you start with your 4 puffs. You've got the top of your ripple here, which is the 2 puffs in the same chain, 3 running down the side, and now we need to form the valley at the bottom before we go back up again. So to do that, we're going to have a lot of loops to contend with. So chain 1, skip 1, and into this next chain, we're going to start a puff stitch, but we're not going to complete it. So carry on your puff stitch, drawing up loops. So you want that motion 4 times. So that's 1 half finished puff. Keep all those loops on your hook. Skip 2 chains and into the next, repeat that again. So yarn over, draw up a loop 4 times. Okay, so you've got 1001 loops on your hook and you haven't got much room to play with, but we're going to yarn over and draw through all these loops except that very last one. So tilt your hook, that's the best way, tilt it so it's facing down, then it won't catch on those stitches. If it's that way, it's more likely to catch. So yarn over and very carefully draw through all those loops. If it's easier, do 1 puff at a time. So that's 1, then keep going. That's 2. Once you have 2 loops, yarn over and pull through both those loops. So you've formed a sort of puff decrease with 2 skipped chains in between. Chain 1. Now we're going to work back up the side. So skip 1, puff, chain 1, skip 1, puff, chain 1, skip 1, puff, chain 1. You want 3 puff stitches running back up the side. So now we're back up to the top again. So chain 1, if you haven't already. Skip 1 and into the next chain, puff, chain 2, puff. So you're going to repeat this section here all the way down your chains. So you have your peak up the top and little valley down the bottom. And in between your peak and your decrease of the bottom, you'll have 3 puffs up the side. Chain 1's in between, skip 1, puff, chain 1, skip 1, puff, chain 1, skip 1, puff, chain 1. Down the side. And I will show you that sort of puff decrease one more time. So that's my sort of third side puff. And to do that puff decrease, skip 1, start a puff stitch in this chain here. Skip 2 chains and start another puff in the next. Then yarn over and pull through all bar that last loop. Once you have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through both. Chain 1. Then you're going back up the side again. Now I've just got 1 more up to go. So it's sets of 3 for the sides. So now we're at the top, skip 1, puff, chain 2, puff, all into that same space. So you would repeat this up and down all the way along for the full length of your blanket. Then when you're reaching the end, you'll be at this stage here where you've just done a sort of increase up the top here. You've got these chains remaining. So just as you have been doing with sets of 3, chain 1, skip 1, puff, chain 1, skip 1, puff. You want your 3 puffs as normal. chain 1. So I've got my 3 puffs, and you will have 3 chains remaining. So you've gone up and down for this very tricky, irritating, annoying working into the chains row. And because we started with 4 puff stitches on this side, we're going to end with 4 on this side. So you've got your last 3 chains, skip 1, pop in an extra puff stitch, and then to end, do not chain 1, instead work a double crochet into this very last chain. So now you have finished that incredibly frustrating. There's nothing worse than working into chains, especially when you're doing like a ripple, because sometimes, it just takes such a disproportionately long amount of time. But the good news is things get better from now on. We will not be faffing working into chains. Now, row 2 is the pattern repeat row. So the row we're about to do, you will do for the entirety of your blanket. So to start, chain 3 and turn. Now we're going to be working into these chain 1 spaces in between your puff stitches from the row below. Everything is worked now into chain spaces. So we're going to start by popping a puff immediately into this first chain space. So skip that first puff. Oh, that is so much easier working into a chain space. So you've skipped past that puff and you've worked straight into that chain space. Now, chain 1, puff in the next chain space, chain 1, puff, chain 1, puff. Chain 1. Now you start and end every row with 4 puff stitches, but in the middle of the blanket we'll work in sets of 3. So now you have reached the top and into this chain 2 space, puff, chain 2, puff. So you're working an increase into the increase from the row below. Chain 1, puff, chain 1, puff, chain 1, puff in the next 3 chain spaces. So now we're working in sets of 3. Chain 1. So you've got your increase at the top, 3 sides, and now we're going to work into the chain spaces either side of your decrease from the row below. So in here and in here. We're going to do exactly what we did with this one. So start a puff stitch in that first chain space, then skip this decrease puff and do your other half puff in the next chain space. Once you've got all those loops, yarn over and pull through all except that last loop. Yarn over to close. So you've done your decrease over your decrease. Chain 1 and work 3 puff stitches up the side, which should neatly bring you back to your increase at the top. Don't forget your chain 1 in between your puffs. You should be back up the top now, and into the chain 2 space, pop your increase. So this is how you would work the center sections of your blanket. Everything will be lined up. So you have your increases in the chain 2 space of your increase, and you do your decrease in the chain spaces either side of the decrease below. So on the next row, be either side here, so they all line up perfectly together. So you don't really need to think about it, and it's just working in sets of 3. So it'd be 3 down the side, decrease, 3 up, increase, 3 down the side, decrease, 3 up, increase. So keep going all the way along. I'll do my next little return, and I will meet you on your very last peak up the top. Don't forget those chain 1s in between your puffs. All right, so that was my last increase. And when you reach this very end part of the blanket, so on the far side, we started with 4. So we're going to end with 4. So chain 1, puff, chain 1, puff, chain 1, puff, chain 1, puff in that last space, but do not add a chain 1 after that 4th puff. So that's my 3 normal ones with the chain 1 in between. This is my very final puff. And to end, do not chain 1, but work a double crochet into the top of the turning chain from the row below. So this is the skipped chains from that very first row, or in subsequent rows it will be the chain 3 from the row below, but end with a double crochet into that turning chain. This will keep your edges beautifully straight. So start and end with 4 puffs, and the sides in between have got 3. And that's all there is to it. You just keep repeating row 2. Everything lines up, so you don't need to think about it at all. It's a great one for sitting down in front of the telly, and with it being a puff stitch, it is a fantastic scrap blanket or way to use up any yarn that you just want rid of, because boy will this eat it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you go on to make yourselves great big ripple puff blankets of your own. Puff, ripple, ripple, puff. Not really even sure what to call it. It's just a stitch, really. Please do let me know if you make one of these. It's so squishy and light and soft. I'm obsessed with it, and this certainly will not be the only one that I make. So until next time, happy crocheting. Bye.